Hey guys, in this video you will learn a little bit about how to use historical sources and which sources you should rely on when you do historical research. Let's start by talking about the importance of historical sources. So basically, as a historian, you don't know all on your own what happened in the past. And so if you want to learn what happened in the past, you need to use sources in order to figure that out. And good historical research requires the use of good sources. Basically, the sources are your foundation. And if you use bad sources, anything you build on top of these sources will also be shaky and unreliable. And so most good historical research bases itself on lots of reliable secondary sources, which give necessary information, background, context, stuff like that. And then at least a few strategically selected primary sources, which you will interpret on your own in order to make some kind of original contribution to the understanding of the past. Start by talking about secondary sources, which are the main sources you are going to be using at the high school level. And I've broken down secondary sources into three levels. There are excellent sources, good sources, and bad sources. Obviously, you should use primarily excellent and good sources when you do research in my class. So excellent sources give you detailed info and they are super reliable. This includes stuff like modern printed encyclopedias and books on whatever subject you're studying, electronically published scholarly articles on your topic, which you can find very easily by using Google Scholar, and also professionally reviewed online encyclopedias. One such encyclopedia is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Some good sources, which are definitely useful and are usually reliable as long as you're careful, include unbiased websites and also Wikipedia, which we will talk about later. And finally, there are bad websites and other sources, and this includes most of the stuff that's out there. These sources give very little info, and the info they do give is unreliable. A lot of websites that will pop up if you do just a normal Google search are bad sources. And also any articles or books that are published by clearly biased parties. One example of this would be political groups. Excellent secondary sources should form the foundation and the core of your historical research. And these include print sources like encyclopedias and history books. And these are good because they are usually very reliable and they give detailed and thorough information. The cons, however, can be that they're difficult to locate and they can be expensive if you have to buy them. As you know, we don't have access to a lot of print sources, so it might be hard for you to use these in your research. Another good thing you can use are online scholarly articles. And these are awesome because you can access thousands of them using Google Scholar. For example, I just Google searched in Google Scholar Taoist architecture, and I found something like 10,300 results in 0.7 seconds. So you should definitely use this resource. There is a ton of information out there written by experts that is free to access. The only drawback of this is that sometimes these articles can be too detailed and they can be difficult to read. And this is because sometimes they're written for experts, not for general researchers like you guys. And finally, there are also professionally reviewed encyclopedias. And these are awesome because they give lots of basic information with a broad focus, which is what you guys are probably looking for. And they also provide links to other sources. But the drawback here is that they usually cost money to access. So there are only going to be a couple out there that you guys are going to be able to use for this project. Now let's talk about good sources. And so these are in general a little bit less reliable than the excellent sources, but they have the advantage of being highly accessible and usually free. So the first one is an unbiased, well-run website. And how can you tell if something is unbiased and well-run? Well, you can tell it's unbiased by figuring out who is in charge of the website. Is it some political group? Is it some religious group? Or is it based out of a university? Obviously, if it's based out of a political group, it'll probably have a bias. But if it's run by a state university, for example, it will probably be pretty fair and balanced. Also, you can tell it's well run if, for example, it's not filled with a bunch of typos, or it doesn't have a bunch of flashing advertisements all over it. Those are signs that the website is not really something you want to use. So anyway, the pros of this are that they're easily accessible and they give you solid info. The cons are that they are not as deep or as reliable as the excellent sources we just mentioned. And also we've got in this category Wikipedia. Now don't freak out. Do not freak out. Wikipedia is a useful historical resource as long as you use it well. And it's useful because it's got a lot of advantages. It's very easy to access, and it provides tons of solid information on every subject that you can imagine. It also gives really awesome visual sources, lots of really cool pictures, and it also gives links, usually down at the bottom, to other good online resources. Sometimes the links at the bottom of the entry are more useful than anything else on the page. The cons, though, are that some false hidden stuff can be hidden within the facts. And this means that you always need to check up on any facts that seem weird or extraordinary, and always make sure you look at the citations at the end of the article. Where did they get the information from that made it onto Wikipedia? And another con is that a lot of people don't trust Wikipedia at all. And this means that if you only use Wikipedia, a lot of people won't trust your research. So you need to back yourself up with other sources besides Wikipedia. And last of all, we've got the bad secondary sources. And these include most websites, especially stuff like Yahoo Answers and About.com, and any sort of website where people can just add answers with no kind of filter. You can't really trust what these sites say. You'll often get contradictory information, and it might just even throw you off rather than help you get closer to the answer you're seeking. So really just avoid these. Look for reliable websites as I outlined in the previous section. And also biased websites are totally useless because they will provide you with a false perspective that could lead you astray in your research. Now let's talk about primary sources. So these have some serious pros. And the main pro is that a primary source is historical information that is transmitted directly from the past and that has been uninterpreted by other historians and also by possibly biased parties. And these also make you look super professional if you can use them well. The reason for this is that it allows you to make original contributions. So rather than just saying what other historians have already said, you can read these primary sources and come up with new ideas and new interpretations of the past. The drawback, though, is that they're hard to find, they can be hard to read, and there can also be possible hidden biases in the information that you're receiving. But we need to use primary sources as historians, and so we have to work to overcome these drawbacks. And it's getting easier and easier to find primary sources, so that disadvantage is going away as we speak. Especially Project Gutenberg has proved very useful for finding good primary sources. They can be hard to read, and the best way to overcome this is to strategically pick a few good sections and to read those really carefully rather than trying to read entire books. And last of all, to make up for possible hidden biases, you should use secondary sources to learn about the primary sources that you're using and to figure out the perspectives of the people who wrote them. By figuring out the perspectives of the people who wrote them, you can figure out what their biases might be, and you can read their works with a critical lens, questioning them on points that they might have been a little bit unfair. If you can do these three things, primary sources will add incredibly to your historical research. They'll make you look super smart, and they will make your work interesting both to normal everyday people and also to historians. That's it for this slideshow. Thanks for listening, and please make sure you use this information as you carry out your own historical research.